The first warning didn't come from the sky. It came through the systems. Satellites going dark, surveillance drones glitching mid-air, nuclear launch protocols triggering on their own, then immediately freezing. A silence fell across every corner of military infrastructure, like something bigger than all of them had decided Earth didn't need its weapons anymore. But Commander Mason Black knew better. This wasn't just cyber warfare. This was a prelude. He stood at the edge of NORAD's main command center, jaw clenched, staring up at the chaos of cascading data streams on the wall monitors. Countries were scrambling. China, Russia, America, even rogue states. Everyone was reporting the same thing. Satellites vanishing, sky drones blacking out, deep space telescopes fried like overexposed film. The stars had gone dark. "Sir, we're getting signals, not ours, not theirs either," Lieutenant Ward said, eyes wide as he hovered by the main console. "It's not any language we know. No math, no binary, no spectrum coding. It's like something we weren't meant to read." Mason didn't blink. "Run it again. Every decryption protocol we've got. I want it in English or fire someone." They all heard it before the code cracked. A voice, not quite mechanical, not quite organic, buzzed across every channel on Earth. It came through phone lines, satellites, even bled through analog TV sets no one used anymore. "This world has been deemed primitive. Surrender sovereignty. The Galactic Empire will extract resources. Resistance will result in planetary correction." The room went dead quiet. Then screaming. Then laughing. And finally, the one thing Mason hated the most. Disbelief. He turned. "Everyone shut up." Eyes locked on him. "We've always joked about aliens, pretended we're the center of the universe, but listen close. These sons of bitches are real, and they just made the worst mistake in their goddamn lives." Someone dared to scoff. "We're ants to them, sir." Mason walked up and punched the wall screen, hard enough to spiderweb the glass. "Ants don't nuke themselves into glass deserts and still keep breeding. Ants don't turn continents into war zones and call it progress. We've got enough hate, rage, and war machines to make hell blush, and we've never even been united before." Ward looked at him, nervous. "What now?" Mason pulled a cigar from his jacket, old habit, unlit, and bit down on it like a soldier gritting a bullet. "Now? Now we wake the fuck up, because humanity's finally got what it always wanted. And what's that, sir? A common enemy." They arrived 5 days later, not with ships that screamed or glowed. No, the Empire came like a black mist, silent, cold, undeniable. Entire cities blinked out. Tokyo, Berlin, Cairo. No fire, no rubble, just gone, like they were never there. But Earth had learned war from the worst, and it learned it well. Underground, in bunkers forgotten by peace treaties and foreign policy charades, the real weapons lived. The forbidden tech. AI banned by the Geneva Accords. Neural-linked soldiers. Cities built underground to survive nuclear winters. Now turned into launch pads. Mason was flown to Site 9, where Earth's last contingency was stored. Project Revenant. A collection of men, criminals, ex-soldiers, mercenaries, plugged into machines that erased fear, pain, and memory. Mindless, obedient, and merciless. Once humans, now war incarnate. The general in charge didn't smile as Mason entered. He just asked one question. "You really want to unleash these monsters?" Mason looked at the monitor, Earth's skyline shrouded in alien clouds, the moon carved with symbols like it had been branded. "They brought monsters to our home," he said. "Let's show them what ours look like." 2 hours after Mason gave the green light, Site 9 roared back to life like a sleeping god awakened by fire. Buried beneath what used to be an abandoned mining town in Montana, the complex buzzed with an energy that didn't feel human. Lights flickered as ancient generators groaned awake, pushing voltage into chambers that hadn't seen movement in years. Glass walls fogged from sudden temperature shifts, revealing the things behind them. Men once human, now something far worse. The Revenants. They hung in rows like sleeping bats, suspended from black metal hooks drilled straight into their spines, wires snaking into skulls, chests, arms. Their skin was pale, marbled with steel and scars. Their eyes didn't open when the power returned. They didn't need to. They felt the war in their bones, like wolves scenting blood on the wind. Mason stood behind reinforced glass, arms folded, face blank. But inside, something boiled. These were the ghosts of a war humanity never acknowledged. Soldiers taken from the worst battlefields, those who'd survived things that broke lesser men. Instead of giving them medals, they were disappeared, converted, wired, weaponized. And now they were Earth's final answer. "They'll need handlers," Dr. Richter said beside him. Her voice was cold, clipped. "Each one has a kill radius of 2.4 kilometers. If their neural link isn't monitored every minute, they'll turn on everything, including us." "They won't," Mason muttered, never taking his eyes off the one in the center. Broad-shouldered, face torn in places from self-mutilation, cybernetic implants gleaming like buried knives under skin. "They hate the enemy more than they hate us." Dr. Richter's lip curled slightly. "You say that like you know them." Mason tapped the glass. "That one, top middle." "Yes." "I trained him." She blinked. "Before he was selected?" "Before he volunteered." She stared. "Volunteered? That's impossible. No one volunteered for Revenant Protocol." Mason turned to her, voice like gravel. "He did." They launched 3 squads within the hour. The first was sent to the Himalayas, where alien structures had begun sprouting from the mountains like tumors. The second was dispatched to intercept the crafts hovering over what used to be Los Angeles. The third, Mason's squad, was bound for New York, or what was left of it. As the black stealth jet rocketed through dead air, Mason sat strapped in between monsters. Their suits were matte black, pulse-reactive, shaped to kill rather than survive. The pilot was AI. The flight path was coded to avoid known alien surveillance zones. But Mason didn't care about stealth. He was there to send a message. Across from him, the Revenant he once trained, Unit ID J11, turned his head slightly. "You're not one of us," he said, voice guttural, like rust scraping metal. "No," Mason said calmly, "but I made you what you are." J11 gave something like a smile, though it came out crooked and cruel. "You made us tools. Number, I made you necessary." Silence followed, thick and choking. Then the AI's voice kicked in. "Arrival in 3 minutes. Prepare for drop." The outer walls of the jet hissed, then peeled away as if the aircraft itself was opening its ribs. Wind tore through the cabin. Mason held firm, strapping his rifle across his chest. The city below was ash and ruin. Skyscrapers had melted. Streets were cratered, not by bombs, but by gravity distortions, holes punched into reality by alien tech. Hovering in the center of it all was one of them, a living fortress. Not a ship, a creature. It floated just above Manhattan's dead core, its skin like chitin laced with chrome, hundreds of eyes blinking across its surface, mouths reciting alien code like corrupted prayers. Smaller drones buzzed around it, like hornets protecting a queen. "Target in visual range," said the AI. "Drop us." Without another word, the Revenants leapt. Mason jumped after them. There was no parachute. Their suits absorbed velocity, hitting ground like thunder made flesh. Pavement cracked. Cars flipped. The drones reacted instantly, swarming toward the new threat. But they were too slow. J-11 tore through the first wave like a nightmare made real. His arms extended into blades, his movements jerky but lethal, limbs snapping in unnatural angles as he danced through enemy ranks. Another Revenant, G9, deployed something even worse. She screamed, a sound engineered to rupture circuitry, and 4 drones dropped dead in midair, bleeding black fluid. Mason moved behind them, taking precise shots, one after another. His bullets weren't ordinary. These were magnetic-accelerated slugs, tipped with compressed neutronium. Each one split targets in half like paper. But the real horror was when the floating fortress noticed them. Its skin rippled, and from underneath it dropped a new shape, a biped. Tall, thin, elegant in a terrifying way. Its limbs were jointed wrong, like it had studied humans but didn't get the details quite right. Its face was an absence. No eyes, just darkness where features should have been. The Revenants paused. J-11 took one step forward. "I remember this one," he said. Mason looked at him. "What is it?" "A collector." Mason frowned. "You mean soldier?" "No," J-11 said, voice harder. "This thing doesn't fight, it observes, studies. It took my team, long before I volunteered. I watched it disassemble my captain's skull like it was reviewing architecture." Mason's grip tightened on his weapon. The collector floated down gently, and when it landed, the very air recoiled, like the laws of gravity weren't sure how to hold it. Then it moved. 1 step, 2, fast. J-11 met it, head on. They collided mid-air with such force, the ground ruptured. Energy arced off their bodies in jagged lines of white heat. Mason was thrown back, rolling hard across broken concrete. When he got up, he saw J-11 on the ground, arm torn off, sparks shooting from his shoulder. But he wasn't dead. He was smiling, blood in his mouth. "Bleed for me," he hissed, lunging again. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but in reality it was less than 20 minutes. The collector proved almost untouchable, its body phase-shifting between attacks, slipping through bullets and plasma like mist. But the Revenants weren't just fighters. They were rage bottled into steel. Each time they fell, they rose harder. And Mason? Mason found the core. Amid the battle, he slipped into the crater beneath the hovering creature. His scanner beeped like a heart monitor, spiking. There it was, deep under the floating mass, an organic conduit, a heart, a brain, a weakness. He dropped a beacon. "Package placed," he whispered into his comm. Back in orbit, the signal reached Earth's last orbital cannon, a weapon banned by every treaty since the 2000s. The Hammer, a railgun so powerful it could crack Mars. Command confirmed. "Strike inbound. Get out." Mason turned, running through hell, fire raining down from above as the Revenants fought their losing war. One of them was already down, cut in half but still crawling. Another burned alive, laughing as she took 3 drones with her. J-11 saw Mason sprinting. "You got it?" Mason nodded. "Then go." "What about you?" J-11 turned, already charging the collector again. "I wasn't made to survive. I was made to kill." The sky split. Light fell like judgment. The hammer hit the target with the fury of a god denied worship. The floating fortress exploded in all directions, a shockwave turning the city into vapor. Mason barely made it to the evac craft, gripping a scorched wall as fire chased him. When the dust cleared, there was no more Manhattan. Just silence. And a signal. A short, broken one. "Not over." Then static. Mason sat in the craft, face blackened with soot, bones aching. "They're not done," he whispered. No one answered. But he knew. The war had only begun. They called it a victory. The headlines around the globe blared the same lie in different tongues. Empire repelled in New York. Earth strikes back. Mankind stands tall against the stars. But Mason Black wasn't celebrating. He stood in the center of a burnt-out observation deck somewhere in northern Canada, overlooking a frozen lake that had been converted into a launch pad. The air stank of ozone and melted composite. Even this far out, the aftershocks from the orbital strike had rattled the tectonic plates beneath the continent. Victory? They'd lost New York. And worse, they had no confirmation that the collector was dead. The last signal from J-11 had been incomplete. Garbled, static, shredded by EMP spikes. But Mason had listened to it over and over again, memorizing every second of it like scripture. Not over. They see everything. We're... Then silence. Then smoke. He clenched his jaw, fingers digging into the railing until his knuckles popped. The techs in the room kept their distance. No one wanted to disturb him. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he'd survived. "Commander Black," a voice said finally. Deep, calm, no fear. He turned. General Aldrich stood at the doorway, broad, scarred, older than the war itself. The kind of man who didn't flinch when governments fell or populations vanished. He walked forward slowly, boots crunching against broken glass. "We need to talk." Mason didn't move. "About what? How we won the battle but lost the goddamn city?" "No," Aldrich said flatly. "About what we do next." Mason snorted. "Next? You want to escalate? With what? You think they're going to stop because we dropped one cannon shot on one of their scouts?" Aldrich handed him a data pad. "We intercepted a signal." Mason took it, jaw tightening. The display lit up with scrambled glyphs, shapes that didn't follow any known syntax. But the translation algorithm had run its course. The message was decrypted. He read it, then read it again. Then looked up, something cold crawling down his spine. "They're not just here to conquer." "No," Aldrich said. "They're here to collect." The message was a declaration. Earth identified as resource-rich, conversion to harvesting zone initiated, civilian population to be processed, military to be neutralized, resistance increases yield. "Resistance increases yield," Mason whispered. "What the hell does that mean?" "They feed on it," Aldrich said, grim. "Pain, violence, emotional trauma, our resistance, fuels their tech. They're not a species. They're a damn ecosystem of weaponized suffering." It made sense now. Why they didn't wipe humanity out in one strike. Why they toyed with cities, dropped a collector instead of an armada. They weren't just conquering. They were feeding. Mason stared out over the frozen lake, eyes hard. "So every time we fight back, we give them what they want." "No," Aldrich said. "Every time we fight back blindly. That's why you're here, Black. You're not just a weapon. You're a tactician, and right now we don't need rage. We need surgical rage." Mason turned. "What do you want from me? The Revenants were a success. But we can't deploy more. There are only 4 left. You saw what happened to J-11's squad. They died fighting. They died feeding the enemy. We need a different edge, something they won't see coming." Mason narrowed his eyes. "What are you not telling me?" Aldrich handed him another file. Project Dirge. Mason opened it and nearly dropped the tablet. "Jesus Christ." "Yeah," Aldrich said. "We tried diplomacy once, before they arrived. Launched deep space probes with messages, signals of peace, even offered samples of culture, history, and technology." Mason nodded slowly. "I remember. The Ark Initiative. They responded. One signal. A warning. Which said, 'You are not worthy. Stay contained, or be consumed.'" Aldrich stepped closer, voice quieter now. "But we didn't stay contained, Mason. We kept expanding, kept pushing. And one of our deep space relays, Relay 9, sent back an anomaly before it was destroyed. A frequency dot. Let me guess," Mason muttered. They didn't like it. More than that, they feared it. The signal scrambled one of their forward recon vessels before impact, short-circuited their sensors, neural disruptions. For 5 minutes, their ship floated like it was brain-dead. And now we turn it into a weapon. 6 days later, Mason was inside another monster. Dirge wasn't a cannon or a missile. It was a sound, a weaponized frequency, looped through low-band harmonics that disrupted alien cognition. But it wasn't portable. The only way to fire it was through amplification towers built into old Cold War communication arrays. There were only 3 left operational, and all of them were buried under cities now under Empire control. Mason was assigned to the Seattle Tower, or what was left of it. The infiltration team was lean. 12 Black Ops units, 2 Revenants, the last functional ones, and a mobile emitter the size of a tank. They were dropped in at night, through a snowstorm that the Empire hadn't bothered clearing. Weather meant nothing to them. The city was unrecognizable. Seattle was quiet, like a graveyard. Buildings hollowed out, windows melted. Alien flora grew through the cracks, bioluminescent vines pulsing with green light, pulsing like veins. Drones moved slowly overhead, scanning for motion. They moved underground, using old subway tunnels. Mason led from the front, rifle in hand, every step deliberate. Behind him, the revenants hissed softly. No names, just numbers. K2 and R7. He didn't talk to them. They didn't talk back. But when they emerged at the base of the old comms tower, K2 let out a sound Mason hadn't expected. A growl. "Problem?" Mason asked quietly. K2 raised a long finger and pointed at the base. There were bodies, human ones, hung upside down, skin peeled but not cut, like it had been dissolved. Eyes gone, chests opened to expose rib cages. Mason fought the bile rising in his throat. "We're running out of time," the team's tech whispered. "If we don't activate Dirge now—" "I know," Mason snapped. "Just move." They climbed. Silently. Carefully. The Empire had left guards, 2 collectors stationed at the top of the tower. They weren't watching the door. They were focused on a device planted on the antenna, something humming with energy. A disruptor. They knew Dirge existed. They were trying to kill it before it screamed. Mason didn't hesitate. He lifted his rifle and fired point blank at the closest collector. It turned too slow. The bullet pierced the disruptor first, detonating the alien tech in a flash of white-blue fire. The collector staggered back, part of its face melting. The second turned, but K2 lunged and ripped through it like a beast unleashed. Blood, if that's what the black sludge was, splashed across the walls. The tower trembled. Dirge was online. The tech scrambled, hooking the emitter to the main line, fingers flying across keys as the frequency built. Signal climbing, 40%, 60, 80. Mason turned toward the skyline. Alien drones twitched mid-air. Structures shimmered. Collectors screamed in unison across the city, high-pitched, not pain, not fear, but something worse. Recognition. They remembered this sound. "Fire it!" Mason barked. The tech didn't hesitate. He hit the final key. Dirge sang. The tower pulsed with sound, inaudible to human ears, but visible in its effect. The air itself rippled. Alien structures cracked. Drones exploded mid-air. The sky turned purple, then sickly red. And the collectors? They ran. For the first time since the invasion began, they didn't fight. They fled. Mason grinned. "That's right, you bastards," he said. "Run!" They got out barely intact. The tower collapsed 10 minutes after discharge, overloaded by the power surge. The city burned behind them as they extracted. But Mason didn't look back. He stared at the file he'd recovered from the collector's gear. A map. It showed Earth. And it showed what came next. The Empire hadn't sent an invasion. They'd sent a scouting party, and the real armada was already on the way. 3 weeks after the dirge pulse screamed across Seattle, the first real ship arrived. And it didn't come through orbit. It tore through it. The sky cracked open above the Indian Ocean like a wound in the heavens. Not with a flash, but with a silence so thick, every animal, every machine, and every human in a 1,000-mile radius stopped breathing for 3 full seconds. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not an explosion, a deep, endless hum, like the whole world was being tuned to a different frequency, and from that void, something emerged. Not a ship, a continent-sized leviathan. It didn't fly, it drifted, like a moon that forgot its place. Across the globe, satellites went blind again. Every radar, telescope, and skywatch station reported the same thing: mass displacement. Energy readings so dense, they bent signals around them. And buried within the swirling chaos, there was one unmistakable signal. Harvest begins. Mason Black watched it unfold from a secure facility in Eastern Europe. Once a missile silo, now a military hive. Intel screamed in from every channel. Military brass and covert heads from every surviving government sat in a sealed war room, voices tense, faces pale. No one was arguing anymore. There were no more borders, just a shared fear. General Aldrich stood at the head of the round table, fist clenched as he stared at the holographic image of the Leviathan drifting through the upper stratosphere. It was larger than most countries. Alive, breathing, its outer shell pulsed with veins the size of mountain ranges. "Any word from the other towers?" Mason asked. Aldrich shook his head. "The Shanghai site was compromised yesterday. Tehran before that. Last transmission from Cape Town said they were holding, but we lost signal 6 hours ago." "Dirge was our edge," Mason muttered. "They're eliminating it." "They're adapting," Aldrich corrected. "They learn faster than anything we've seen." Across the room, Dr. Richter stepped forward. She looked worse than Mason remembered, eyes hollow, voice rasping from days without sleep. "We've analyzed their response patterns," she said. "Every pulse of the dirge weapon made them smarter. Not just reactive, evolved." Mason narrowed his eyes. "You're telling me we're upgrading the enemy every time we hit them?" She hesitated. "Yes." The room fell into dead silence. Then Aldrich spoke, low and hard. "So what's your proposal?" Richter didn't flinch. "We hit them with the final pulse, all 3 towers, simultaneously. A tritone harmonic, not a signal, a death chord. The one thing their neural mesh can't adapt to." Mason frowned. "We only have 1 tower left." "Not true," she replied. "We've found a 4th. She tapped a key, and a new location lit up. Antarctica. The convoy moved fast. Across the frozen deadlands of the Antarctic plateau, 6 armored transports roared through blizzards with modified turbines, their treads slicing through ice thicker than concrete. Inside, Mason and the remaining strike team prepped the payload. This wasn't just another pulse. This was the final chord. 3 overlapping sound weapons, each tuned to a different vibrational frequency, each one mapped to a different alien cortex. Together, they didn't confuse the enemy. They destroyed their minds. But the cost was lethal to humans, too. Only those with neural dampeners installed could survive prolonged exposure. Everyone else would drop dead the second the cord finished. That was the price. "Suit integrity check green," barked one of the techs as she walked the aisle. "EMP shields lev. Dampen regulators at 82%. We're good for 10 minutes inside the blast zone. After that, you fry." Mason checked his own system. Black body armor reinforced with triple-layered dampeners, a mouthpiece to regulate oxygen and keep his jaw from shattering during acoustic impact. He turned to his team. Just 6 now. No revenants. They were all gone. Only men and women who had nothing left and refused to die quiet. We plant the amplifiers, we sink the charge, and we light the sky, Mason said. Anything gets in the way. Kill it fast or die slow. There's no reinforcements, no evac, no backup plan. One of them, a scar-faced pilot named Hagen, grunted. You always give motivational speeches like that? Mason cracked a dry smile. Only when I mean it. The tower was buried, not under snow, but under flesh. They reached the site and found it already compromised. The Empire had sent tenders, massive, slow-moving organisms that looked like centipedes and whales fused together, chewing through the ice with acid-coated mouths. They were building something, or maybe growing it. A spire, black and bone-white, stretching into the sky. It wasn't just alien. It was replacing Earth. They're terraforming, Mason muttered. Right over the tower. The techs got to work fast, unloading the final cord modules. Mason took point, cutting a path through the tenders with heavy plasma bursts, his rifle glowing white from heat. He moved like death, precise, efficient, unstoppable. One by one the tenders died screaming, collapsing into steaming puddles of sludge. But then the sky changed. The clouds above twisted unnaturally, and a shape descended. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a collector. It was something worse. A seer. They were myth among the military briefings. No images, no data, only rumors from deep black skirmishes. Seers were the consciousness of the Empire, not leaders, not generals, voices of the whole. It floated down like a god made of insect glass and molten gold, its body shifting with each breath. No weapons, just presence. Mason froze. The seer looked at him, not with eyes, with something deeper, and it spoke, but not with words, with memory. Mason felt himself falling backward in time, into the worst day of his life, his wife's death, her scream, the cold hospital hallway, the doctor's hollow words, the blood on the bed. He relived it perfectly. The seer was inside his grief, feeding. He fell to his knees, roaring in pain. "Commander," Hagen shouted, but his voice sounded like it came from underwater. Mason gritted his teeth, bit down on the regulator, punched his own thigh with enough force to tear the muscle. Pain broke the trance. He aimed his rifle, fired, and the seer flinched. It didn't die, but it moved, back, afraid. "They feel it," Mason hissed. "They feel fear." "Then let's give them a damn feast," Hagen yelled, slamming the final cord's activation key. The modules spun up. 3 frequencies began to rise. The seer screamed, not with sound, but with psychic pressure so thick the snow melted around it. Then the cord hit full sync, and Antarctica erupted. The final cord didn't just kill, it obliterated. Every drone, every organism within 1,000 miles convulsed and died, its neural web shredded by overlapping frequency blades. The seer cracked apart in midair, breaking into shards like stained glass, its body howling with stolen pain. Mason lay flat against the frozen ground, vision tunneling, suit sparking from overload. But he was alive. Barely. One eye swollen shut, one eardrum ruptured, breathing ragged. He looked around. 3 of his team were dead, blood leaking from their ears, faces twisted in agony. But the sky was clear. For the first time in weeks, silence. Back at base, the celebration was quiet. No parades, no champagne, just exhaustion. But then the radar techs shouted. "Something's happening." Mason limped into the command center, eyes bloodshot. What now? The screen showed Earth, and above it, a wormhole, massive, tearing open like a wound in the galaxy, and from within, shapes moved, hundreds, thousands. The Armada had arrived. Mason closed his eyes. This wasn't the war, he whispered. This was the introduction. They were too many. The wormhole hovered above Earth like a bleeding star, wide as the Pacific, spinning with sickly light. From its depths poured the Empire's true force, not scouts, not collectors, not seers, but warships the size of cities, living weapons wrapped in shell and flame. The night sky was no longer black. It was crimson. Global defense systems lit up across the continents, orbital cannons firing blind, missile barrages arcing into the clouds, laser networks slicing through atmosphere. For a moment, it looked like Earth had teeth. But the moment didn't last. The first ship landed in Egypt. It didn't burn, it swallowed. Cairo vanished in a blink, sucked into the creature's underbelly like water down a drain. Buildings, people, memories. Gone. What remained was a crater filled with spines and smoke. Then the ships began to spread. One to South America, one to Africa, 2 over Europe, another drifting slowly toward the American East Coast, casting a shadow large enough to cover 5 states. Humanity had one advantage left, and it was locked inside a frozen tomb. Mason stood outside the hangar doors of Site 0. It was colder here than Antarctica, but not because of weather, because nothing lived in this place. Site 0 wasn't on any map. It wasn't in any database. It had been erased from existence during a classified purge 3 decades ago. Even Aldrich, who had clearance above nuclear command, hadn't known what lay inside. But Mason did. He was there when they buried it. It had been his first mission, and it had nearly killed him. Behind the steel doors lay Earth's last nightmare, Project WRAITH, not a weapon, a being. The Empire had sent one of their own to Earth 50 years ago. A scout, presumed dead in orbit, shot down during a meteor storm. But it survived. It crashed. And it changed. It adapted to Earth's gravity, learned to hide, learned to mimic. The military found it, captured it, studied it, and in a moment of brilliance or madness, they fused it with human DNA, tried to make it ours. It didn't work. The creature escaped containment, killed 17 of the brightest minds on the planet. And then it spoke. Not with words, but with thoughts, emotion. I can be death, or I can be vengeance. Let me choose. They locked it away, buried it beneath steel, behind psychotronic dampeners and cognitive locks. Only one man ever communicated with it again. Mason. The doors groaned open. Steam billowed out. Lights flickered. Mason walked down the corridor, alone. No techs, no soldiers, no backup. He passed rows of empty labs, shattered terminals, the remains of failed experiments long forgotten. Then he reached the final chamber, a cylinder of reinforced glass filled with liquid stasis fluid, thick and dark. Inside floated a figure, humanoid, but wrong. Limbs longer than human proportion, bones too flexible. Its skin shimmered between black and blue like oil on water. Its eyes opened. Mason stepped forward. "Wake up." No reply. "You said you could be death." A pause. Then the chamber shuddered. Cracks appeared, and the fluid drained. The creature stepped out, steam hissing off its skin. No chains, no resistance, just purpose. "I remember you," it said, not aloud, but directly into Mason's skull. "You remember pain," Mason replied. It smiled. "I remember purpose." Mason nodded once. "Then come earn it." They deployed Wraith in Eastern Europe, where the Empire had begun converting old battlefields into something new. Massive nests of bone and technology were growing out of the land, pulsing with rhythm. They weren't just stations. They were gateways, nodes connecting to the wormhole above. If those nodes synced, Earth would be consumed. So Mason brought Wraith to the nearest one, and watched the monster work. It didn't fight like a human. It didn't even kill like a revenant. It unmade, With every step, Wraith's body shifted. Claws became blades, arms became whips of gravity, its very presence disrupting energy fields. It didn't run. It glided, passed through walls, ripped through Empire drones like paper, and the worst part? It learned. Every attack it absorbed, it reused. Every movement the enemy made, it mimicked and improved. Mason stood behind a blast shield a mile away, watching the transmission live. The node crumbled in 12 minutes. The surrounding army, estimated 3,000 alien soldiers, wiped out in 7. The sky cracked again, and this time the wormhole trembled. Wraith didn't speak often, but when it did, Mason listened. "You buried me because you feared me," it said one night, perched atop a ruined building overlooking the smoking valley below. "Now you use me because you fear them more." Mason sat beside it, sipping from a dented canteen. "I fear extinction more." Wraith tilted its head. "Then let me do what you cannot." "And what's that?" "Turn fear into belief." Mason looked at the stars. "You think we can win?" Wraith said nothing, then pointed. The wormhole above Earth shimmered, and a second one opened next to it. Mason's blood ran cold. "What the hell is that?" Wraith answered without turning. "The Emperor." The word alone triggered alarm across every global network. Empire Emperor. Until now, it had been a myth. Whispers of a being not born, but forged, crafted in the core of a dying star, immune to all known physics. Not a ruler, a force. He didn't command with words, he imposed. And now he was coming through the sky. Mason stood with the remaining world leaders, what few remained, in an old stadium turned command center. The Emperor's ship was visible even without tech. A spiral of black tendrils and gold flame rotating like a celestial storm. "He's not here to conquer," Richter whispered. "He's here to judge." Mason stared at the beast crawling through space like a god coming to Earth. "Then let's make him regret it." Earth's final stand wasn't a battlefield. It was the planet itself. Every remaining weapon, every satellite, every AI drone, every man with a gun, every woman with rage in her soul. They all moved as one. For once, in the history of this divided species, unity wasn't a dream, it was necessity. As the Emperor descended, Wraith stepped forward. "I was made from him," it said. "Now I will end him." Mason clasped its shoulder, half human, half monster. "No," he said, "we will." And the world watched as 2 monsters, one alien, one born of Earth, clashed in the heart of a dying planet. The storm had come. But Earth wasn't breaking. It was rising. The Emperor didn't land. He didn't need to. His presence weighed on the planet, a force of gravity and consciousness that pressed against every mind, machine, and muscle. Birds fell from the sky. Oceans rippled without wind. Entire cities wept from the static alone. Mason Black stood on the roof of an old Soviet bunker in the Carpathians, watching the air burn as the Emperor's spiral-shaped ship hovered above the mountains. It didn't cast a shadow. It swallowed the sun. Behind him stood Wraith, silent, tense. Its normally shifting skin was frozen, still as obsidian. For the first time since its release, it wasn't moving, not morphing, not adapting. Mason glanced at it. "You afraid?" Wraith's head twitched. "Not afraid, just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The first time I met him." Mason turned back to the sky. "You mean the Emperor?" "No," Wraith said. "The absence of him. The silence he brings. It's not like death. It's worse. He erases meaning." Mason didn't respond. "What do you say to a thing that remembers being unmade?" Then, without warning, the Emperor spoke. Not through the air, not in any language. He imposed thought, a psychic roar that tore into the skulls of every living creature. Your cycle ends. Your violence feeds. Your resistance refines. Soldiers across the globe screamed and fell to their knees. Planes crashed. Bunkers went dark. Even Wraith reeled, staggering a step back. Mason's vision blurred, nose bleeding, teeth cracking under the pressure. But he stayed standing. "You want us afraid," he hissed, blood soaking his lips. "But we're past fear now." The air around the Emperor's vessel shimmered. A second voice echoed. Softer. Colder. Almost curious. "You persist." Wraith bared its teeth. "That's the difference between your kind and mine. You calculate persistence. We live it." With a deafening shriek, the sky tore open. The Emperor descended. No ship. No armor. He came as a figure of blinding, fluid light wrapped in coils of darkness, 30 feet tall, his body bending space with each step. A halo of floating metal shards circled his head, vibrating in patterns that made Mason's bones itch. He didn't walk. He simply arrived. One moment above the mountain, the next in front of them. Wraith stepped forward and bowed. Mason blinked. "What the hell are you doing?" Wraith didn't move. "It's not respect, it's strategy." The Emperor lifted a hand and ripped Wraith apart. In a single gesture, he flayed skin from muscle, muscle from bone, bone from memory. Wraith's scream wasn't sonic. It was conceptual, vibrating in every cell of Mason's body like a memory of trauma he'd never experienced. The creature dropped to its knees. Dying. And the Emperor turned to Mason. "You carry no legacy, only fire. Fire dies." Mason stared up at the god of extinction, then raised his gun. It was a dumb move. He knew that. But humans are built for dumb moves in the face of overwhelming odds. He fired. The bullet never reached. The Emperor stopped it with a blink, frozen mid-air, melting into dust. Then he touched Mason's mind, and Mason fell. There were no dreams, no memories, only raw truth, poured into him like lava, erasing thought, leaving only instinct. He saw Earth, not as it was, but as the Emperor saw it, a feeding ground of chaos, hate, war, and madness. A hive of emotional violence so potent it fueled their intergalactic expansion. Humanity wasn't the target. It was the product. Wars, genocides, tragedies, all harvested. And Mason realized it in horror. They hadn't come to conquer. They'd come to reap what we had sown. Then a second thought hit him. If suffering was fuel, then what happened when rage burned clean? Mason opened his eyes and screamed. The mountain was collapsing. The Emperor turned, sensing something had shifted. Behind him, Wraith was standing again, but it wasn't the same. It had changed. Its body glowed, not with fire, but with memory. It had absorbed Mason's pain, his guilt, his rage, and it had become something new, not a weapon, not a monster, a revenge-born god. "You thought you made me," Wraith said aloud. "I was always made by him." It pointed at Mason, and then it moved. Faster than the eye could follow, it slammed into the Emperor, claws lashing, bones shattering under each strike. The impact shook the mountain. Shards of light exploded from their collision. Thunder roared through the heavens. Mason staggered to his feet. His mind was barely holding together. He watched the two titans battle across the sky, one forged in extinction, the other reborn in vengeance. And somehow, Wraith was winning. The Emperor struck with thought. Wraith answered with rage. Every time the Emperor erased a limb, Wraith regrew it stronger. Every psychic lash was answered with a scream that broke sound barriers, and Mason realized Wraith had learned the Emperor's truth. They weren't just invaders, they were parasites, feeding on pain. So Wraith flipped the script. It gave them too much. Elsewhere, across the world, Resistance forces watched in awe as alien drones began to twitch. Fall. Ships lost altitude. Structures cracked. The Empire's connection to its army was weakening. Wraith was overloading the system, using its own network of pain against it. Mason raised his comm. Tell every nation now, hit everything, burn it all, while they're blind. The response wasn't hesitation. It was detonation. All across the world, humanity struck back. Orbital lasers punched through motherships. Nations once enemies fought side by side, bombing spires and reactors and harvesting nodes. Earth bit back. And the Empire? The Empire flinched, but the Emperor wasn't done. Bleeding light, fractured, broken, he whispered one final thought into the atmosphere. If I fall, your cycle continues. And he reached for Mason. Not physically, not mentally, spiritually. He tried to replace him, but Wraith saw it coming and made the final choice. It wrapped itself around the Emperor and around Mason and detonated. A psychic bomb of memory and rage and pure defiance. The mountain vaporized, the sky cracked, and the wormhole collapsed. Mason woke up 2 days later, in a field, alive, scarred, changed. The sky was blue, the air quiet. And the war, over. No more ships, no more whispers, just silence. But not peace, because Mason now carried something. A fragment of Wraith, a fragment of the Emperor. And he knew this was not the end, but the beginning of something worse, something only a man like him could stop. And this time, he wouldn't wait. The war was over, but peace never came. For the first time in modern history, Earth was united, not by flags or diplomacy, but by a single bitter truth. Survival had replaced civilization. The governments were ghosts, the borders were ash, and the cities? They weren't cities anymore. They were scars. Mason Black stood at the edge of what used to be Warsaw. Now it was just a field of skeletal structures, half dissolved by plasma fire, half grown over with alien flora still twitching from residual energy. Even in death, the Empire's fingerprints lingered. Smoke curled from collapsed towers. Drones, now deactivated and rusting, lay in twisted heaps beside mass graves. There were no more soldiers, only survivors. And Mason was one of them, if you could still call him that. He pulled the glove from his right hand and stared at the skin beneath, or what should have been skin. Instead, his palm glowed faintly. Faint veins of dark light pulsed beneath the surface, black and blue, like oil on water. The Emperor had touched him, and Wraith had bound to him. He wasn't entirely human anymore, not inside, and he felt it, all the time, especially at night. Voices, memories, things he'd never lived but somehow remembered, alien worlds, dying stars, whole civilizations burned down to embers because they dared to fight back. Mason had seen it all, in fragments, in flashes. He was haunted and changed. That's why he stayed away from the camps. People still looked up to him, still whispered his name like it meant something, but they didn't know what he was now. They didn't see what was growing inside him. Not yet. He walked the ruins alone most days, not for patrol, for penance. Each crater he passed was a reminder, each melted skeleton a consequence. He'd authorized those strikes. He'd led those missions. He'd unleashed Wraith, and he'd survived when thousands didn't. Sometimes he asked himself why, but the answer always came back the same. Because Earth still wasn't safe. Not really. The Empire's death had left a vacuum, but it wasn't empty. Their departure didn't erase their influence. It spread it. Their tech was still buried beneath cities. Their biology still pulsed in the roots of corrupted soil. And worst of all, their signal was still broadcasting, not out to space, inward. Mason had first heard it 3 nights ago. A pulse, like a heartbeat. Quiet, measured but undeniable. He'd tracked it to the remains of an old data tower outside Munich, and what he found shook him to the core. It wasn't an alien beacon, it was human. The chamber was buried 20 stories beneath the rubble, sealed behind carbon alloy blast doors. Someone had built this before the war. Someone who knew. Mason forced his way in using a neural override. His body had changed enough to break through Empire-level encryption. Another thing he didn't fully understand, and didn't trust. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit. Dozens of cryotubes lined the walls. Only 5 were active, and in those 5 tubes, 5 children slept. Perfectly still. Perfectly identical. Not clones, not quite human. Hybrids. He stared, breath locked in his chest. Each child had the same black and blue shimmer beneath their skin. Same pulsing veins. Same signature as the Emperor. And just like that, Mason understood. The Empire hadn't just come to feed. They'd come to seed. Back at the war camp, General Aldrich didn't want to believe it. He looked older than ever now, shoulders hunched, voice slower. The victory had cost him more than blood. It had cost him belief. "You're telling me they were breeding replacements?" he said. "No," Mason replied. "They were building insurance." Aldrich blinked. "You think the Emperor knew he'd fall?" Mason nodded. "That's what empires do. They plan for succession." He dropped the datapad on the table. A 3D model flickered to life. Blueprint overlays of the children's DNA. Spliced with human genome. Engineered with precision far beyond Earth's biotech. "These kids aren't just hybrids," Mason said. "They're carriers. For what, I don't know. But they're not passive. That signal I found? It's tied to their heartbeats." Aldrich leaned forward. "You want to kill them?" "I want to understand them, before they decide to understand us first." Silence. Then Aldrich shook his head. "Number, we don't have the resources. We barely have food. You want to babysit alien children?" Mason leaned in close. "They're not just children. They're legacy weapons." Aldrich didn't argue after that. He just told Mason one thing before dismissing him. "If they wake up wrong, don't hesitate." He didn't. One of them woke up 4 days later. A boy, maybe 8 years old, though it was impossible to tell. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't smile, just sat on the edge of the cryotube, staring at Mason like he already knew everything he needed to. Mason approached slow, gun holstered but ready. "Do you understand me?" The boy tilted his head. "Are you human?" The boy blinked once, then nodded, but Mason's pulse told him the truth. He was lying. That night, the dreams returned, but they weren't dreams. They were visions of the boy, standing in a field of bones, of other children rising from fire, of a new empire, not alien, but something worse, familiar, because this time it looked like Earth, felt like Earth. But it wasn't Earth. It was a reflection twisted by power. Mason woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and he knew. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. He left the next morning. Didn't tell Aldrich. Didn't take a team. Just packed a rifle, 2 mags, and a neural disruptor modified to overload hybrid biosystems. He was going to the other sites, to find the other children, and if he had to, end them. He didn't want to, but he knew what they were. And worse, he knew what they'd become, because he could feel it in himself, too. The darkness, the rage, the memory of the Emperor still whispering beneath his skin. "Cycles don't break," he muttered as he climbed onto the old bike and rode into the ash winds. "They just change names." And he was going to make damn sure this one never got a name at all. The road stretched dead across Europe's wasteland like a scar. No checkpoints, no patrols, no more armies, just ash, wind, and silence. Mason Black rode through the gray, helmet tight, eyes locked ahead. His rifle hung across his back, but he hadn't touched it yet. Not even when he passed through the remains of Berlin, where the air still buzzed with radiation, and the ground occasionally moaned from half-dead alien tech twitching in the soil. He was headed to the final site. Coordinates pulled from the last data node. 5 hybrid children had been found. 1 had awakened. 2 were missing. And 2 more remained in deep stasis beneath the bones of a forgotten research station in the Swiss Alps. Wraith's last memory had shown him a vision, not of destruction, but of corruption, the kind that doesn't shout or conquer, the kind that whispers until you mistake it for your own voice. That's what these children were, not enemies, infections with faces. Mason wasn't afraid to kill, but he was afraid to be wrong. He reached the station by dusk. The sun was a red smear behind the mountains. Snow fell gently, but the cold didn't touch him anymore, not since Wraith bonded with him. His skin regulated itself now, like an internal furnace burned just below the bone. The station was buried beneath a collapsed glacier. It had taken him 2 hours and a half of fuel cell to power the lift and get underground. And what he found down there wasn't just old tech. It was civilized. Clean floors, working lights, power. Someone had been maintaining it, which meant someone had been protecting them. And sure enough, when he reached the central chamber, the 2 cryotubes glowed with faint blue light, and standing between them was a girl. 10 years old, maybe less. Pale skin, jet black eyes. She didn't speak when she saw him, didn't run, just stared. Mason lowered his hand to his belt slowly, unclipping the neural disruptor. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. The girl tilted her head, curious. "You're Mason Black." His blood chilled. She hadn't asked. She knew. "Who told you that?" "You did," she said simply. "Last night." "I wasn't here last night." She stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Yes, you were, in the dream. You showed me fire, you showed me pain, you showed me choice." He didn't move, but inside he was cracking, because she was right. He'd seen her in his dreams, along with the boy, along with a world wrapped in golden towers and black roots, Earth reborn as something else. "I don't want to be him," she said softly. "The Emperor. That's who you're afraid of." Mason nodded once. "He didn't die. Not really. He scattered. Into every piece of tech, every drop of blood, every echo of pain." "And into us," she said. Silence. Mason drew the disruptor, her eyes locked on the weapon. No fear, just sadness. "Will you do it?" she asked. "Like the others?" He flinched. "You killed them, right?" "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did," she said. "You always do. That's the only thing that makes you different from him." Mason stepped forward. He aimed the disruptor at her heart. One press. That's all it would take. Her cells would collapse, her nervous system would burn out. Quick, painless, safe, and the war would truly be over. She didn't blink, didn't beg, just stood there, waiting. And in that second, Mason saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Not forced, not naive, but real, because she was waiting for his choice, not as a weapon, as a test. He lowered the gun. "I don't know what you'll become," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. "But if you ever lie to me—" "I won't. If you ever become him, stop me." He stepped back, and for the first time in months, Mason Black smiled. Just a flicker. But it was real. "Get the others," he said. "We have work to do." The camps didn't trust them. Of course they didn't. 3 hybrid children, barefoot, quiet, glowing faintly like stars. Whispers spread. Riots followed. And Mason took every blow, every insult, every threat, because he knew they were watching. Not just the hybrids, the survivors, the world. Everyone was waiting to see if the war was really over, or if they'd just let the next version of it into their homes. The hybrids didn't fight back, didn't resist. They built, taught, healed. In days, they'd reverse-engineered food from broken Empire processors. In weeks, they'd repaired more infrastructure than 5 governments had in 5 years. But Mason didn't relax. He couldn't, because on the 50th day, the boy finally spoke. And Mason knew something had changed. "The signal is coming back." He gathered what remained of leadership, military heads, scientists, even Aldrich, who now walked with a cane and spoke like his lungs were made of gravel. The boy stood at the center of the war room, calm, still, and spoke the words that chilled every soul in the bunker. "It's not over. The signal was just a piece, a test node." Aldrich leaned forward. "Are you saying they're still out there?" "No," the boy said. "I'm saying they're already here, in your bones, in your systems, in your bloodlines. The Empire didn't conquer planets." He looked at Mason. They infected them. The world had changed, not just physically, but biologically. Everyone who had survived the war had been touched in some way, by technology, by sound, by grief. The Empire hadn't needed to win, they just needed to trigger evolution. And now? Mason realized Earth was no longer a battleground. It was a seedbed, one that could still bloom into something monstrous, or something better. It all came down to what they became next. And Mason, half man, half memory of Wraith, stood at the line. He looked at the children. He looked at the world. And he made one final decision. "I'm not saving this planet again," he said. "I'm raising it." 10 years later. The sky over Earth was blue again, but the stars were being watched. Satellites lined the orbit. Defense platforms spun in silence. And at the core of Earth's new unity, a man sat behind a desk carved from the steel bones of the Emperor's ship. Older, harder, still carrying the glow beneath his skin. Mason Black, president of the Terran Accord. And across from him sat the hybrid girl, now a teenager. Sharp eyes, steady hands, smarter than most people alive. "We found another signal," she said. Mason didn't flinch. "Origin?" "Deep space, not Empire, something else." He leaned back in his chair, cracked his knuckles, and smiled. "Let's go meet them." She raised an eyebrow. "Diplomacy?" "No," Mason said. He stood, walking toward the observation window overlooking the stars. "Let's make sure they know what Earth is now." She nodded. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, a signal was sent from Earth. One sentence, one warning. "We remember the war, and we learned how to win."